we love our Tulalip home. Sometimes circumstances cause us to move away, but we always love to come back to Tulalip. Grace Meninick moved away when she married Herb Goedel in 1946. But after he retired from a career in the Navy and Grace had a health scare, they moved the family back home to Tulalip in the early 1970s. Grace and her family give an insight into her life both on and off the reservation in their own words.
I was born Grace Meninick. I was born on the Tulalip Reservation. I was born on the Chuck Campbell property. There used to be a big house there, and my grandmother delivered me there.
I think this is a letter that she typed. It's a date of birth, 15th November 1928. Born at home, midwife, Catherine Bagley, on the Tulalip Indian Reservation. So this says that she was actually born here on the reservation. Her mother, Agnes, gave custody of me to Grandma at birth due to a bitter separation from my father, Wilbur Meninick, a Yakima Indian.
My grandmother, Katie Bagley, and my grandfather, Ambrose Bagley, raised me.
I was raised and cared for by two of the most wonderful grandparents in the world. My own grandfather died sometime before I was born. His name is Francis Cece.
Francis Cece comes from the Charles Cece line. Mm-hmm. In fact, I believe it's Charles that's in that old picture with the people sitting around a picnic table, and he has a white beard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think so.
He's my great-grandfather.
Grandma and Ambrose Bagley lived a common law marriage. Ambrose worked and cared for us for so many years.
When he and my grandmother got married, he moved here to Tulalip, and he worked as a logger, and he fished and hunted, and he pretty much provided for me as I was growing up. He was a very nice man.
Grandma worked very hard also. She was a very sweet lady. She was about 60 years of age when she undertook care of me as an infant. I can still remember riding on her back as she had me tied on with a shawl. I can still remember peeking over her shoulder, especially when she went berry picking.
Oh, she was a wonderful lady. She was so industrious. Usually every summer we were out picking berries, or sometimes we'd follow my grandfather, when he went clam digging. And we'd camp on the beach. In fact, he would bring us out here behind a longhouse, pitch up a tent. My grandmother and I would stay up there all summer long. And she used to dry what they call kayaya, dried salmon. And she had a little smokehouse, and she'd have just fish hanging all over the place. And every morning she had to go out and light a fire so they'd get that hickory taste, And she used to dehydrate clams, and that was delicious. I don't know what she did to it, but it was so flavory, and it was kind of like, I guess people use it for snacks, like beef jerky. Mm-hmm. The more you chewed on it, the more flavorful it got. But one thing about my grandmother, we never went hungry. Oh. Never were hungry. My grandmother didn't speak English at all. Oh. She didn't speak English at all.
Oh, so that's all she spoke to you?
Yeah, so that's all she spoke was Indian. And, my grandfather spoke some English, and he did real well. But he spoke Indian too, so, yeah.
She did talk about how people helped each other. I think a lot of people shared resources and were there for each other. She talked about translating for her grandparents because they didn't speak English very well. So she would often accompany them to town, and she said she started doing that at a very young age.
It really was, everybody's just surviving and trying to roll with the punches as far as living in a society where you are second class. And that's, how she described it. At any moment you could be in trouble for being.
And Indians, it seemed like always were a close-knit people because everybody's their cousin or everybody's their aunt or uncle, whether they're related or not. People were just close-knit, and that's how they survived, was being together and talking Indian and helping each other.
Oh, I didn't ask you where you went to school.
I went to Marysville.
To Marysville?
Uh-huh.
And then when you were sent to Cushman, you went to school.
Yeah, and then
there.
I went to school there.
And Grace apparently just spoke Lushootseed at home. When she went to school, I believe it was the Marysville 10th Street School. And her cousin, Pauline Johnny Badrock, helped her to adjust to elementary school and help her learn English.
But I did get tuberculosis, and so they sent me to Cushman for about 4 years. I lost a lot of weight. I was really skinny. And so my stepfather, Richard Spencer, my mother was married to Richard Spencer at the time, says, there's something, I remember him saying, there's something wrong with her. She's really skinny, you better find out what's the matter with her. So that was when they found out I had TB.
I remember she said that she was there with relatives and that she was sick, and I think she had tuberculosis, and many of the natives had tuberculosis, and they kind of gathered them all up and they put them all together. And she said they were trying to teach everybody English, and she said their hands were always slapped with either a ruler or a yardstick, I don't know what it was, if they were ever caught speaking their native language. And so she said she only went to the 6th grade, and I just thought, why would you only go to the 6th grade? That seems kind of strange to me. But she said one day, as she was in class, she was speaking her Lushootseed to somebody, I don't know who it was, and someone came and slapped her wrist or her hand with either the ruler or whatever it was they hit her with. And she said she grabbed it and she broke it in half. And she said, don't ever hit me again. But I believe that's the reason she only went to the 6th grade. She said she left that day and she never went back.
I believe my mother probably talked to her, or our mother probably talked to her in the Lushootseed.
What did your mother die of?
Childbirth.
Oh.
Childbirth, yeah. She was in the hospital. They used to have a hospital here on the reservation. And she died when I was 9 years old.
Oh.
And she had 4 other children, Richard, Ruth, Nancy, and David Spencer. They're my half-brothers and sisters. And when David was born, he weighed 12 pounds.
Wow.
And she was petite. She was very small. I think David was born on the 7th of June, and she died on the 20th.
Oh.
So then my grandmother took David. So in actuality, she raised David and me. And the others, they kind of hopped back and forth between their father and my grandmother.
I know she loved them dearly, and she talked about the ways they disciplined and what it was like for them to have their children put in a sanitarium or, kind of lose them in different ways.
She got along real good with her grandparents, our grandparents. She called them mom and dad, And I can remember every time we went berry picking or pick hops, she would dress herself up so neat, like she's going out on a date or something. White shirt, clean trousers, and go out to pick. And never got her shirt messy. Especially with hops, because hops would stain your clothes, and she would just kind of pick.
She knew her father and the Mennonite side of the family over in Yakima. She did go over there frequently. As a matter of fact, we went over there when I moved back here. We drove over there regularly to go visit and meet with some of her family that lives in Yakima.
After she passed away, I got a picture from her and Dad, with her dad being one of the chiefs meeting in Washington, D.C., and I have a letter that he wrote saying, this is me and I'm with the other chiefs and we're in Washington. I'm kind of reading the letter, it's like, okay, he's saying, I'm a chief and you're my daughter and here's the picture and I just wanted you to know that, I'm over here and this is what I'm doing.
Her grandmother was very much into the longhouse and into the culture, and I don't think her grandmother spoke English very well, so my mother was there quite a bit to help her out.
My grandfather, Ambrose Bagley, was a Shaker. My grandmother grew up as Tulalip, that's a group here. She used to take me to the powwows in Lummi and LaConner. And things have really changed since then, because they used to go out into the woods, oh man, a week to a month to find their song, and to kind of cleanse themselves, and to clear their consciences and so forth. And they'd come in, and then after they got their song, and then they'd probably go for about a week, dancing and singing and getting acquainted with their power. During that time, some of them would have visions and prophecies, and they were pretty close to right. They had, during World War II, this one Russian said he had a vision. And he said, I believe it was one of the Bob boys had gone to war, Second World War, and he says he's not coming home. He's been killed. And it wasn't a couple days he got a message that he had been killed.
She loved to read, so she loved to read the newspaper, she loved to read books, she loved to read the Bible. Every 2 or 3 years she'd have a new Bible, so she was always studying the Bible. She knew the Bible inside and out, and she could always turn and quote scripture, and she knew her scriptures really well. She studied the Bible, she studied the Book of Mormon, she studied the Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, she studied any newspaper that she could get, and she was always studying just good books. Not so much stories, but historical things.
I got married when I was 17. Then we traveled throughout the United States for about 22 years.
Wow.
And then I came back.
Was he in the service or something?
Yes, he was in the
that's what
Navy.
you were-
She said she went to a dance in Seattle and she met my dad, and basically they hit it off. They had one date and then wrote letters back and forth, and he was stationed in San Diego, and she decided, I'm gonna take a chance. I'm gonna marry this redheaded guy from Minnesota.
He wanted her to marry him, so he sent her airfare to fly from here to California so they could get married. In the meantime, my mom was a little more hesitant and not sure, And she decided, well, if she took the bus, that would take longer, and then she would have more time to think about whether she really wanted to marry him or not. And him, he said, well, he sent her money for airfare, and she didn't show up, so he kind of assumed that she just decided she didn't want, took the money and decided she wasn't going to marry him.
And then one day she showed up, and that night when Dad got off, they took a taxi. The driver said, listen, I get off pretty soon, and I would drive you for this amount to Yuma, Arizona, and bring you back in my own car. And Dad and Mom said, oh, okay. So they drove them to Yuma, Arizona, and they got married.
Once she married him, he was in the Navy. She became a Navy wife, and we were a Navy family. So I remember living in Quonset huts in somewhere in California, I think, and we lived in Rhode Island, Alaska, Florida, Texas, Minnesota. We lived all over the United States. I loved it.
She had a lot of really funny stories about when they first got together, and the things that they would disagree about, and bringing him home to meet her grandparents that raised her, and kind of letting him make mistakes in the culture. For example, when he went to visit her parents for the first time, or her grandparents, she called them her parents, he kept saying things like, oh, I like that blanket, or I like that carving, or it took him a while to notice that things were piling up in the corner, and then he realized everything he says he likes, they're putting in a pile and giving him, because that's how she was raised. If somebody says they like something, that you should give it to them. So he left with a whole bunch of things, and he didn't make that mistake again.
And on that, they were total opposites.
Mm-hmm.
Grandpa was hands-on and could make anything, and loved to pinch a penny, and Grandma was, had the, I like to say, like the native mindset with money. Money comes and goes, so spend it while you got it kind of idea. Well, Grandpa was always, save a can so we can get a penny for it,
My mom and my dad were from two different worlds. My dad was a farmer, German background, German family, didn't really know anything about Native people or culture, but he knew he loved natives, and that was evident apparently from what his mother says from the time he was a child, that he loved Native people. He had pictures up on his walls in his room, and my mom was definitely Native. Everything about her was, was just kind of, she had some of those Native traits, and so they clashed quite a bit. I do remember that, but never to the point where it's like I'm going one way and I'm going another. They always worked it out.
I guess you might say when I changed cultures, it was a shock. It was a big shock to change cultures and see how the other world lived, It just seemed like the other culture was always me, And with us, it was never just me, it was us. You. Never me, but you and you. And I'll do it for you. This is for you. But in the other, in another culture, it's all me, mine. I'm number one. So that was kind of hard for me to adjust to.
Okay, and then you said you got married when you were 17.
Mm-hmm.
And how many children do you have?
6.
6
Well,
children.
we had 6. One of our boys died in '92. Well, I don't know if he died or not, but he and some friends went fishing, and they never came back. So he's been missing and presumed dead. So, but we have 5.
Well, my dad retired, we moved to Alaska, and we were living up in Alaska. We'd been there for a couple of years. In the meantime, I got married and moved away. And about a year after I moved away, my mother had a heart attack.
I must have been like 12 or 13. Oscar was 5 years younger than me, So he had to have been like 7 or 8 years old. And it was in the spring or summer sometime, and I was sitting in the house, and all of a sudden we heard the gunshot bang and a scream immediately after. And as the gun shot off and the scream happened, I saw Mom grab her chest and kind of go down to the floor. And I remember Jerry was in the house, and Jerry came running and picked up Mom, and it was like, Mom, Mom, Mom. And she was kind of laying there. Right after that, Lorna came in the house, and Lorna was 8 years younger than me, so Lorna was probably 5 or 6 years old. And I'm pretty sure Mom thought that Oscar had shot the gun and shot Lorna. And right as he shot the gun, little Lorna got stung by a bee, and so it was a bang, and so a mistake had caused the heart attack, but it was probably something that was ready to happen, and when they took her in, you know, that caused a chain reaction. So when they did the bypass, the doctor told her, if you don't go to some place that is warmer than here in Alaska, you only have 5 years. So it was at that time that Mom and Dad decided, well, let's go back to Washington.
We moved from Eagle River, Alaska to Washington. I think I was 6 or 7, or sometime in 1st or 2nd grade. We stopped in Tacoma and stayed with the family there for maybe a month. And then we moved out here on the reservation. I'm not exactly sure whose home it was.
I was kind of slowly introduced to reservation life. We lived in the White House where, I don't know, Grandpa's house, Campbell, I think a Campbell's home, the White House there. And we moved there, and that was our home.
I think the thing I liked was being at Tulalip and Tulalip Elementary and seeing other Native students, which I really had never, ever experienced before. And it was probably about 50% of the class was Native, and so that part was really nice, and being involved in cultural events. And I told you my mom brought me to some of the events that we have out here, so that was really wonderful.
So my introduction to her language came about. We were at a gathering. I think it was at Thanksgiving. I think it was the first Thanksgiving we were here. A guy walks in, and she sees this guy, and across the room she yells, "Ha ha, Moses." And so she kind of makes a beeline over to Ha ha, Moses. And I'm looking at her and Ha ha, Moses are speaking in a language I've never heard. And that was my introduction to her speaking a native language. Up to that point, she'd never really said anything. And years later, I asked her, well, how did you remember? What did you do? And she said, as she traveled around to all those places, as she would pick up a menu and as she would look at things, in her mind, she would translate what she was reading into Lushootseed, and she would speak it in her mind to herself. So most people never knew that she spoke it, but when she came back, she had kept it so close to her that as soon as she saw somebody and it was a friend, she began speaking. And so to me, it was like, whoa.
I find that totally amazing. She told me she remembered Lushootseed by just talking to herself and answering herself. She would ask her questions and she answered. That's how she remembered it all those years. Considering she moved away in '46 and moved back until the '70s. That's totally amazing.
She was naturally a teacher, and she did like to teach, and through church she taught a lot of classes and did a lot of teaching.
She had been talking about it for a while and noticing that fewer and fewer people were speaking the language and somebody should do something about it. But my mom was a person of action, and she would not sit around and wait for someone else to do it.
One is cho. Cho. No, not cho.
So she did start the classes and taught them for free for a couple of years. I think she taught them out of our home, and then she used a local church for a while before she started teaching at Everett Community College, and I think she taught also at University of Washington before she got really sick.
I started out teaching my daughter Cherie and my brother David. I thought, well, if I can teach them, I'll be happy. So I started teaching them, and pretty soon people would go, and I heard you were teaching, Indian. So they said, can I come and participate? And sure. First thing I knew, I had a class. And so I taught about a year just teaching, and then I taught through Northwestern Indian College, and for about a year, I guess, something like that. And now I teach at Everett Community College, 101, 102, and 103, Lashutsi.
Oh.
Yeah, and then of course I teach the Snohomish dialect.
Now, is that very different from the Skagit?
Well, it's a little different, but you can still understand.
She was a good teacher, but I wish she'd kind of learned that the characters we learn are in the dictionary, because she'll kind of sound out the words phonetically, and it was real difficult switching between those two for me. So we kind of helped each other in ways.
I think she was just waiting for the day when it would be as big as it is. I don't think she thought she would see it get to that level, but I think she was rewarded when, like, my brothers and we all went through the Lashutsi camp.
I think she felt like that really was a great accomplishment, and something that she did to connect our ancestors to today. I know she would be absolutely thrilled with the way things are going now.
Mom was a very giving person. She loved her children, she loved her grandchildren, she loved her siblings, she loved her family, she loved her people here. She adored these people. Oftentimes she would speak to them as though they were here, the ones who had gone. And I had been in a room with her several times when things had happened, and she would speak to the people who were gone in her native language. And sometimes I felt like, yeah, they're here. So I think she would want to be remembered as a very loving person to the people of this area, the Tulalip natives. She had a love for them and for her family.
I think she could like to be remembered as a good person, a humble person, a person that had a lot of family values, and she belonged to the Mormon Church. And I think more important, she wanted to pass on the Lashutsi language.
She talked about leaving something, and she left Lashutsi for everybody.
I think she would like to be remembered as someone who loved learning. She had just a strong love of learning and knowing and growing, and was never satisfied with just, I'm here and I'm just going to stay here. Even in her older years, even the Lashutsi sometimes was a challenge for her because it wasn't a written language. She had to learn how to write it, and she had to learn how to use a computer in order to, give handouts to the class and to help teach it. So, but she was up for the challenge. She just would sit at that computer for hours and hours trying to put a lesson together because it was all new to her as far as the written part of it. And she was really a great influence in me, I think, and my siblings as far as education, and just telling us, that is just the most important thing you'll do is to get an education and just keep going and learning, and she was a good example of it as well.
I think she would want to be remembered as a bridge between the past and the future, because she did dedicate a lot of her later years to reviving the language.
Very good.
but she also spent a lot of time in preparing at least her children to be strong in the new world and to be able to stand in both worlds if need be, and to also try to have that bridge with our own children. So I think that's how she'd want to be remembered.
Although Grace passed away in 2000, she left behind a legacy of lifelong education for her family and her contributions to saving the Lushootseed language for the community. Her influence is still being felt today. She would be proud of the achievements of both her family and those of the Tulalip tribes.